When you think of stat padding in the modern-day definition, you think of players chasing stats, whether it's to complete a triple-double or break a record. However, in the past, stat padding was connected to scorekeeping. All NBA games have a scorekeeper on the sideline manually recording the numbers and stats of every player, and back then, it wasn't as regulated or precise as it is today. No one really cared if a player was generously given a couple more assists or a couple more steals than they actually got. Home cooking is a popular term when the stat keepers on the sideline prop up their hometown team by giving their players more stats than they actually deserve. For what reason exactly? Well, maybe it's to make their own players look better on the box scores. Maybe it's to help their guys get more recognition. After all, the scorekeepers are also fans of the team they work for. Or maybe it's to help a certain player win the Defensive Player of the Year award. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today let's take a look at some extreme instances of stat padding by the scorekeepers. How big can the difference between a player's numbers at home versus on the road actually be? Let's take a look at the evidence. Without further ado, let's get started. Many years ago, the topic of shady record keeping was brought into light in regards to a player we all know of, John Stockton, the career leader in assists and steals, two categories where he currently holds the record, and they will most likely never be broken because they're so far out of reach. When Chris Paul was on the Rockets, a discussion popped up about John Stockton's assist numbers. When Paul was asked about potentially catching Stockton's assist record, he responded, "I don't know who the statisticians were who used to do the stats in Utah, but ain't nobody catching that." This generated a huge debate whether or not statisticians, not just in Utah but across the league, favor the home team when it comes to subjective stats like assists. The official definition of an assist is very vague. It simply is, quote, "a pass that leads directly to the basket." It could be interpreted in different ways. Can the player take one dribble or two dribbles before scoring? Would that result in an assist for the guy who passed him the ball? Due to Stockton's gargantuan assist numbers, he was at the center of this controversy. But after several well-researched articles and Reddit posts, it turns out the Jazz statistician was not biased after all. John Stockton averaged 10.9 assists at home and 10.1 on the road, a plus 7.3 difference at home, which is around average. Nowhere near as egregious as some other top assist leaders. In fact, at the time this article came out in 2019, Chris Paul had the exact same difference as Stockton himself. Quite a coincidence. Then, this Reddit post adjusted the difference into assists per minute, and Stockton, once again, falls literally smack dab in the middle. Almost every player listed here records more assists at home than on the road, because generally players play better at home. For example, let's use John Stockton's 1990-91 season, where he averaged 17 points and 14 assists per game. That was one of the best years of his career, and the Jazz had a 36-5 home record, tied for the best home record in the entire league. But they were only 18-23 on the road. Naturally, it makes sense why Stockton would get more assists at home, because the Jazz were simply a much better team at home. For the most part, this myth of Stockton's total assists being a result of shady scorekeeping has been debunked. However, that doesn't mean this didn't apply to other players. The most egregious example is actually Nick Van Exel, who recorded nearly 25% more assists at home than on the road. It sounds almost unbelievable. Or maybe, could it be he simply plays so much better in front of his home crowd? Well, it turns out a former stat keeper admitted he tuned up Van Exel's assists just to see what he can get away with. Quote, "I don't want the numbers to be meaningless, and I felt they were becoming meaningless because of how stats were kept. So I decided I'm gonna do this totally immature thing and see what happens." It was childish. In that game where he recorded 23 assists, if you go back and count, he actually only had like 15 or 16. It's hard to fathom that even in the mid-1990s, stat keeping in the NBA was still not taken that seriously, with former professionals literally admitting they were messing around with the numbers. It makes you wonder how inflated some players' numbers truly were. If there's one way that sports betting has improved the NBA landscape, it's most definitely stat keeping. When there's money on the line for the entire sport, the game needs to be accurate with its numbers. Heck, even as recent as the Jaren Jackson conspiracy was, where the Grizzlies stat keeper was accused of inflating his block numbers, that turned out to be completely false. The NBA cannot risk tarnishing their image like this. Still, it's kinda crazy to think that not too long ago, some scorekeepers were willingly testing the boundaries of their profession and seeing what they can get away with. The next few examples I'm gonna talk about, however, were a lot harder to cover up. On June 20th, 2024, Tom Haberstroh released the most convincing article in regards to the inconsistent home and away scorekeeping, and it attracted a lot of attention because at the center of this controversy was none other than Michael Jordan. His 1988 Defensive Player of the Year award was called into question when it was discovered his home and away stats for blocks and steals that season were by far the most egregious of any player in NBA history. Since coming into the league in 1984, Jordan had always been known as one of the league's most tenacious defenders, yet the Defensive Player of the Year award has always eluded him. Prior to the start of that season, Jordan made his frustrations known to the public, claiming he was a much better defender than Michael Cooper or Alvin Robertson, so why hasn't he won the award? Then he made this statement to the press. Michael Cooper is great at ball denial, but check his other stats. This league gives defensive awards on reputation, it just teased me off. Dare I say it? It got personal with Jordan. This was enough to rally his supporters, and nobody was a bigger fan of the Bulls than the stat keepers on the sidelines, working for the team. The 1987-88 season came along, and along with it, a heavy narrative to support Jordan's case for DPOY. He crushed the voting and won the award by a landslide. Yet, something seemed off. When you dig deeper into the stats, Jordan averaged 4 steals and 2.1 blocks per game at home, but just 2.1 steals and 1.2 blocks on the road. He nearly doubled his averages at home, an absurd difference in stats that cannot be ignored. What's even crazier that hasn't been talked about is, before and after his 1988 season, he wasn't even close to winning the award in any other season. In the year prior, he only received 1 first-place vote. In the year after, he only received 3 first-place votes. In the year he won, he received 37 first-place votes. It almost seemed like there was a collective effort to help him win the award in 1988. An incredibly strong narrative backed by Jordan's relentless desire to be recognized as the NBA's best defender. Here's a chart that shows he had the largest differential between home and away blocks and steals out of any DPOY winner in history. The most damning evidence came when you examined a box score on February 15, 1988. The official box score for this game indicates the Hawks had 10 turnovers, and the Bulls as a team registered 10 steals. That doesn't make sense though, because in order for that to happen, the Hawks would not have committed a single dead ball turnover, meaning turnovers resulting from things like shot clock violations, or travels, or offensive fouls, or throwing the ball out of bounds. This box score indicates that every turnover they had was because the Bulls stole the ball. Except when you watch the game, there were several dead ball turnovers, including a 24-second violation. It would have been impossible for every Hawks turnover to be caused by a Bulls steal. Upon closer examination, Jordan, who officially recorded 5 steals in that game, actually only had 2. There's also this video, posted by the NBA YouTube channel itself, that showed highlights of Jordan's infamous game where he recorded 10 steals. Except if you go through this video, there's only 7 actual steals. This game happened in, of course, 1988, again. While Jordan's controversial steal and block numbers became the center of attention, the bias of home court stat keepers extends beyond just Jordan. A couple years later, in the 1989-90 season, Hakeem Olajuwon recorded the most absurd stat-stuffing season you'll ever see. 4.6 blocks and 2.1 steals per game. Now, in hindsight, nobody's gonna question the validity of Hakeem's numbers. I mean, the dude is arguably the greatest defender in NBA history. With a deeper investigation, however, Hakeem's home and away numbers are just kind of insane. An absurd 5.7 blocks per game at home versus 3.5 blocks on the road. Can you imagine a player averaging nearly 6 blocks per game at home? I've mentioned John Stockton and his untouchable assist and steal numbers, but Hakeem's block numbers might be even more untouchable. He finished his career with 3,830 regular season blocks. The difference between him and number 2 Dikembe Mutombo is greater than the difference between Mutombo and number 7 Patrick Ewing. Doing my own research on this matter, it seems like most highlight videos of Hakeem do not show all of his blocks. There's always several missing from the final count, like with Jordan's steals. I wouldn't be surprised if this happened to any other superstar of that era. With MJ's 1988 Defensive Player of the Year case, Hakeem supporters in Houston were just as vocal about their own superstar's defensive prowess. Hakeem, who averaged even more combined blocks and steals than Jordan, did not win the award until 1993. Back in the 1960s, this era was known for its crazy amount of gaudy numbers that players put up. In particular, rebounds. While Wilt Chamberlain's scoring was otherworldly, it's hard to fabricate points, but rebounds though? Across the entire league, it seemed like every center had unfathomable rebound numbers. Of course, the much higher pace and lower field goal percentage played a role, but still. For example, Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell combined to have 26 games of 40-plus rebounds. All 26 games were at home. As the NBA became more diligent and more strict with their stat-keeping guidelines, the league has changed for the better. Of course, that doesn't mean the discrepancies between home and away stats go away. Almost every player, every star plays better at home. Players are more comfortable playing at home. Hopefully, though, gone are the days where hometown scorekeepers intentionally jack up their own players' numbers, because it leaves a stain on some of the greatest players in NBA history, especially when the evidence is very apparent. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts about this whole debacle. Can you think of any other players from the past whose numbers are kinda skeptical? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.